The stellar horizon drifted above a planet marked as PK 442 on humanity's star charts, its sensors scanning the desolate surface below. What had once been a lush world, filled with evidence of an advanced alien civilization, now lay in eerie silence. Massive craters marred the landscape, as though an unthinkable force had clawed away entire cities. Captain Ilaravant stood on the bridge, her jaw set. What the hell could do this? She murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. Lieutenant Rao, her science officer, glanced up from his station. Preliminary scans indicate this wasn't a war. No radiation signatures, no remnants of orbital debris. It's like the planet was consumed. Vance's stomach tightened. The stellar horizon was no stranger to encountering the unknown, but something about this world, stripped to its bones, set her instincts on edge. Consumed by what? Before Rao could answer, the ship's communications array crackled to life. "Captain, I got something from the surface," said Ensign Harper, her voice tight with unease. "An automated distress signal. It's fragmented, but I'm patching it through." The bridge went silent as the message played. A chorus of overlapping alien voices spoke in a language the ship's translator struggled to process. Then, amid the chaos, one phrase broke through, clear and chilling. "The Devourer comes. Flee while you can." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Captain, we need to leave," Rao said, his usual calm giving way to panic. "Whatever happened here, it's not natural." But Vance wasn't ready to run. "Harper, get me a visual of the surface. Focus on the source of that signal." The main screen flickered, revealing a landscape of skeletal remains, both organic and structural. Towering spires of what must have been a city jutted out like the ribs of a long-dead creature. At the center of the devastation stood a massive organic structure, pulsing faintly with an unnatural crimson light. "That's not alien architecture," Ray whispered, his face pale. "That's alive." Before Vance could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. "Captain, energy spike detected," Harper shouted. "It's coming from—" The ship lurched violently as something massive tore free from the organic structure below. A writhing, chitinous mass of tendrils and mandibles ascended toward the stellar horizon at terrifying speed. "Evasive maneuvers," Vance barked. The crew scrambled, and the ship's engines roared to life, pulling it away from the planet's gravity well. The creature pursued relentlessly, its tendrils snapping out like whips, brushing dangerously close to the hull. "Weapons online," shouted Commander Hayes, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Targeting the appendages." "Negative," Vance ordered. "Our priority is escape. Fire only if it breaches the shields." The ship accelerated, breaking through the planet's orbit, just as the creature's largest tendril slammed into the energy shield. Sparks erupted across the bridge, and the ship groaned under the impact. "Shields down to 48%. Rao called out. "Jump calculations complete," Harper shouted. "Do it," Vance yelled. The stars stretched into infinity as the stellar horizon jumped to FTL. When the ship finally stabilized, the bridge fell into an uneasy silence. Vance turned to her crew, her voice cold but steady. "Get me a full report. I want to know everything about what we just encountered." But she already knew what this meant. The creature wasn't just a predator. It was part of something much larger. And whatever it wasn't going to stop at PK 442. The stellar horizon docked at Concord Station, humanity's most advanced diplomatic hub orbiting the planet Haven Prime. Captain Ilara Vance stepped into the station's central hall, flanked by a delegation of Earth's top diplomats and military officers. Around them, representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species loomed, the elegant, feathered Thaler in their shimmering robes, and the towering battle-scarred Krenon, their scales glinting like dark steel. Vance scanned the room, reading the expressions, or lack thereof, on their alien faces. Humanity's recent emergence into galactic politics had been met with skepticism at best, disdain at worst. Today was no different. Captain Vance said Thaler High Arbiter Alvis Sora, his beak clicking sharply as he spoke. You claim this void swarm is a threat to us all. Yet, forgive me if I doubt the ability of your species to even comprehend such a danger, let alone fight it. Zakar Kren, leader of the Krenon delegation, chuckled darkly, his voice a low rumble. If the swarm is as deadly as you say, perhaps humanity should accept its place as the galaxy's weakest link. It would save us the trouble of defending you. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Vance stepped forward, her steel-grey eyes locking onto Zakar's. This isn't just humanity's fight, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The swarm doesn't discriminate. It consumed PK-442 without hesitation. An entire civilization wiped out in hours. What makes you think your species will fare any better? Alphys tilted his head, his feathers ruffling in mild amusement. Words are cheap, Captain. Prove to us that humanity is worth aligning with. A moment of silence followed as the Thaler and Krenon exchanged glances. Finally, Alphys gestured to a holographic display that lit up the chamber. It showed Elathar Station, a Thaler research facility positioned perilously close to the swarm's known advance. The swarm has been sighted in the Elathar system, Alphys said. Our analysts predict they will attack within days. If humanity wishes to prove itself, your fleet will defend the station alone. The room buzzed with murmurs again, this time tinged with disbelief. Even Rao, standing at Vance's side, leaned in and whispered, "This is a suicide mission, Captain." Vance turned back to the hologram, her jaw tightening. "We accept," she said without hesitation. Alphys clicked his beak in surprise, and Zakar's laughter echoed again. Bold. "I hope your confidence doesn't doom your people, Captain." 3 days later, the stellar horizon and a small fleet of Earth's finest ships arrived at Elathar Station. As they dropped out of FTL, the massive structure came into view, floating in the void like a beacon of civilization against the encroaching darkness. The swarm arrived soon after. Contact. Multiple signatures. Rao called from the sensor station. They're coming out of the asteroid field. Thousands of them. Vance stood on the bridge, unshaken. Hold formation. Focus fire on the closest clusters. The swarm's ships weren't ships at all. Organic monstrosities that moved like predators, darting and weaving in ways that defied standard targeting algorithms. They slammed into the fleet with ferocious speed, and the human ships struggled to adapt. The battle raged on, the swarm's relentless assault threatening to overwhelm the station's defenses. One by one, humanity's ships began to fall. Vance refused to falter. "Deploy the EMP cannon," she ordered. "Captain, the swarm's too close to the station." Hayes, her tactical officer, protested. "If we don't fire now, there won't be a station left to save," Vance said. With a nod, Hayes activated the weapon. The cannon fired, unleashing a pulse that rippled through space, short-circuiting the swarm's organic vessels. Dozens of them froze, their movements jerking unnaturally before they disintegrated. The station survived. The battle left humanity battered, but victorious. And when the dust settled, the Thalir and Krenon could no longer doubt humanity's resolve. The aftermath of the battle for Elathar Station was both triumph and tragedy. The human fleet limped back to Concord Station, its ships battered and scarred. Thousands of lives had been lost, but the swarm had been repelled. Captain Ilara Vance stood in the debriefing chamber, flanked by her surviving officers, as the Thalir and Krenon delegations scrutinized their every word. "You succeeded," said Thalir High Arbiter Althis Sora, his golden eyes narrowing. "But at what cost? Over 30% of your fleet lost. The Thalir would never engage with such reckless abandon. And that's why you've spent centuries hiding behind your star systems instead of taking the fight to your enemies." Zakar Kren growled, his scaled fists slamming onto the table. "Humans did what you couldn't, fought the swarm, and lived to tell the tale." Althis's feathers ruffled, his tone sharpening. Their victory was an act of desperation, not strategy. The room erupted into arguments, with alien delegates shouting over one another. Vance, silent until now, slammed her hand onto the table with enough force to make the room go still. "You both speak of strategy and honor," Vance said, her voice calm, but laced with steel. "But neither matters if we're all dead. Humanity fought and bled for that victory. We may have been desperate, but desperation is what drives survival. You can bicker over tactics, or you can learn from us." Althis opened his beak, but Zakar cut him off with a sharp laugh. "She's got you there, feathered one. I may not like how humans fight, but I can't argue with the results." The Krenon leader leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Vance. "But don't mistake my respect for allegiance. If humanity expects Krenon warriors to follow, you'll need to prove your strength, and I mean your strength, Captain." Vance's brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "A duel," Zakar said, grinning. His jagged teeth caught the light. "Not a fight to the death, of course. But if you want us in your alliance, show me that humans can stand on their own, without fleets or fancy weapons." Althis's feathers flared in disapproval. "Barbaric. This is no way to decide an alliance." "I accept," Vance interrupted, her tone resolute. The room froze. Reo, standing at her side, whispered, "Captain, you don't have to do this." "I do," Vance replied quietly. "We need them." The duel was held the next day in Concord Station's ceremonial combat arena. The Krenon audience filled the stands, their guttural cheers echoing off the walls. Vance, clad in lightweight combat armor, stepped into the ring. Across from her, Zakar loomed, easily twice her size, his scales gleaming like dark obsidian. "This isn't personal, human," Zakar rumbled, "but I will not hold back." "Good," Vance said, drawing a blade from her belt. "Neither will I." The battle was brutal. Zakar's sheer strength and speed forced Vance onto the defensive, each of his strikes powerful enough to shatter her blade if she didn't deflect perfectly. But where he had power, she had agility and cunning. She used the environment, baiting Zakar into overcommitting. Finally, she saw her opening. As Zakar lunged, she sidestepped, driving her blade into the joint of his armor and sending him crashing to his knees. She placed the tip of her blade at his throat. The crowd went silent. "Yield," she said, her voice unwavering. Zakar grinned, baring his teeth. "I yield." He stood, raising her hand high. "The Krenon will fight alongside humanity. You have my word, Captain Vance." Later, as Vance nursed her wounds in the mid-bay, Althis visited her. "You surprise me, Captain," he said. Perhaps there is something to be learned from humanity after all. The Thaler will join your Crimson Pact, but be warned, should you falter, we will not stay. Vance nodded. I'll make sure you won't regret it. For the first time, the Crimson Pact was a reality, but unity was fragile, and the swarm loomed ever closer. The newly formed Crimson Pact was still fragile, its members eyeing one another with suspicion as they scrambled to prepare for the swarm's next attack. The Thaler's meticulous strategists clashed with the Crenon's blunt, warlike tactics, while humanity found itself stuck in the unenviable role of mediator. Captain Elara Vance felt the weight of this alliance on her shoulders, but she had little time to dwell on diplomacy. Reports were flooding in. Entire supply convoys had vanished without a trace, communications relays were going dark, and fleet deployments were disrupted by falsified orders. The swarm was adapting, not just in the battlefield, but in the shadows. "Captain, I've confirmed it," said Lieutenant Rao, his voice grim as he stood by Vance's side on the bridge of the stellar horizon. "The anomalies in our systems, they're not glitches. The swarm is infiltrating our networks." Vance's jaw tightened. "You're telling me the swarm has access to advanced cyber warfare capabilities? That doesn't match their behavior so far." "It's more than cyber warfare," Rao replied. "The pattern suggests something alive, like a parasite embedding itself into our systems, learning from us." The implications hit Vance like a physical blow. If the swarm could use their technology against them, the already fragile Crimson Pact would crumble. "Harper," Vance called to her communications officer, "isolate all critical systems. No external links without my authorization." "Aye, Captain," Harper said, her fingers flying over her console. As the crew worked to secure the ship, a distress signal cut through the airwaves. Vance frowned. "Source: Thaler ship Celestial Grace," Harper reported. "They're stranded near the Nebra Expanse, requesting immediate assistance. Captain Sora himself is aboard." The timing was suspicious, but Vance couldn't ignore the call. "Plot a course," she ordered. "Rao, double-check that signal. I don't want to walk into a trap." The stellar horizon arrived in the Nebra Expanse hours later, its sleek form slipping into the shadowy void of the asteroid field. The Celestial Grace was there, listing slightly with visible damage to its hull. Vance hailed the ship, but there was no response. "Something's not right," Rao muttered, scanning the field. "Captain, I'm picking up faint energy signatures. Multiple. They're swarm drones." The moment he spoke, the swarm ships emerged from the shadows, sleek, insect-like craft that glowed with pulsing red veins. The Celestial Grace sprang to life, its weapons firing, but its aim was erratic, as if it were targeting at random. "They've infiltrated the Thaler systems," Rao said. "The ship's under their control." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Hayes, prepare the strike team. We're boarding that ship." The boarding operation was a nightmare. Vance and her team pushed through darkened corridors filled with flashing lights and the eerie hum of corrupted systems. The swarm's parasitic AI had twisted the ship's automated defenses against them. They finally reached the bridge, where Captain Sora stood, his elegant robes torn, his eyes glowing faintly red. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, his voice distorted. Vance raised her sidearm, her gut twisting at the sight of her ally. "Sora, fight it. We can help you." Sora lunged at her, faster than any Thaler had the right to be. Vance barely dodged, her team opening fire with precise shots that didn't harm the captain, but disabled the parasites infesting his nervous system. With a final, desperate move, Vance activated a portable disruptor, severing the swarm's hold on the ship. Sora collapsed, alive but shaken. Back on the stellar horizon, Sora sat in the medbay, his once pristine feathers dulled with exhaustion. "They were inside my mind," he said quietly, his usual arrogance replaced with a haunted tone. "I saw their thoughts, their purpose. They don't just want to consume us. They want to become us." Vance looked at him, her expression grim. "Then we need to stop them before they finish learning." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of something far more ominous. The swarm wasn't just a physical threat. It was already inside the Crimson Pact, and the fight was no longer just for survival. It was for their very identities. The stellar horizon drifted through the dark void, its engines silent as the crew processed the revelation about the swarm's true nature. Captain Ilara Vance stood in the observation deck, staring at the stars, her mind racing. The swarm's insidious ability to infiltrate minds and manipulate technology had taken them to a new level of threat. If they could bend entire species to their will, the Crimson Pact would be little more than a fleeting hope. "Captain," came a voice from behind her. Vance turned to see Lieutenant Rao, his face tired but resolute. "The Krynon are getting antsy. They're demanding more decisive action. They want to strike back at the heart of the swarm." Vance didn't hesitate. "We're not striking blindly, Lieutenant. We need to know more. We need to understand what we're up against." Rao's brow furrowed. "And you think the Thaler will help us with that? They still aren't fully recovered from their infection." "I don't think we have a choice," Vance said. "We need answers. And I have a feeling the Thaler's ancient archives hold something we can use." The stellar horizon made its way to Thaler Prime, the planet's shimmering cities and towering spires visible from space. Despite the progress made with the Crimson Pact, the Thaler remained a cautious ally. The scars from the attack on Elathar Station still lingered, and their pride had been wounded. But Vance had little time for diplomacy. The swarm was coming. As Vance and her team entered the central archives on Thaler Prime, the ancient stone walls hummed with energy, illuminated by soft, ethereal light. The Thaler archivist, an elderly creature with feathers as white as snow, met them at the entrance. "You seek knowledge," the archivist said, his voice a rasping whisper. "But knowledge comes with a price. What you ask could unravel the very fabric of reality." "We don't have time to debate," Vance replied. "The swarm isn't just a threat to your civilization. It's a threat to every one of us." The archivist studied her for a long moment before gesturing for them to follow. They passed through the vast halls filled with scrolls, crystalline records, and ancient relics. Finally, they stopped in front of a large obsidian obelisk covered in intricate carvings. "This," the archivist said, placing a hand on the obelisk, "is a record of the swarm's origin. They have existed for millennia, long before any of our civilizations rose. They were once a collective of beings, each individual part of a greater whole. They merged into a single entity, and their hunger became insatiable." Vance frowned. "A collective. So they've always been one." "Yes," the archivist confirmed. "They seek to assimilate, to become more. And once they've consumed everything they can, they return to the void from which they came, where they will birth a new swarm, stronger and hungrier than before. It is a cycle." Vance felt a chill run down her spine. "So they never stop. They evolve and repeat." "Indeed," the archivist replied. "But there is a way to stop them. A relic, ancient and lost, lies in the heart of their domain. If you can find it, you may have the power to sever their connection to the void." "Where is it?" The archivist's eyes darkened. It lies within the swarm's heart, the hive, but it is not a place easily reached. It is hidden in a system beyond the edge of known space, shrouded in dark matter. Only those who understand their ways can navigate its shifting paths. Vance turned to Reo, her mind already calculating the risk. We're going to need more than just firepower for this mission. We'll need a guide. Reo nodded. We'll have to go to the heart of the swarm then. Back aboard the Stellar Horizon, Vance stood before her assembled crew and the leaders of the Crimson Pact. The stakes had never been higher. Their only hope now lay in reaching the heart of the hive, a place no one had ever returned from. We don't have a choice, Vance said, her voice steady. We go into the heart of the swarm, we find the relic, and we end it. Or we all die trying. And with that, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Stellar Horizon powered up for what was undoubtedly the most dangerous mission of its crew's existence. With the knowledge of the swarm's origins and their insatiable hunger, Captain Ilara Vance had no illusions about the risks. But the path ahead was the only one that could save the galaxy. The heart of the hive, the place where the relic lay, was not just a physical destination. It was a journey into the very maw of the swarm, where death awaited at every turn. The crew gathered on the bridge, their faces tight with resolve. Vance stood at the center, flanked by her officers. "We're about to enter uncharted space," she said, her voice commanding. "Sensors will be unreliable, and the closer we get, the more our systems will be compromised. But this is our only shot." Lieutenant Reo nodded. "The dark matter field around the hive is already distorting our navigational systems. We'll need to rely on old maps and our instincts to find the way in." "And your instincts better be right," Commander Hayes added, her voice sharp. "We'll be flying blind for most of the journey. If the swarm detects us before we reach the hive's core, we won't make it." Vance's eyes met Hayes, then the rest of the crew. "We'll make it. We have to." The Stellar Horizon launched into the void, the stars twisting as the ship moved into the edge of the dark matter field. As the ship passed the threshold, all external sensors went dark, and the bridge's lights flickered momentarily. The crew, used to the ship's precise, digital world, now found themselves in an unsettling reality where the unknown was everywhere. "Stay alert," Vance ordered. "We're entering their territory now." For days, they navigated the shifting expanse, the ship groaning under the strain of the warped space around them. Time itself seemed distorted in this vast, shadowy expanse, where the laws of physics bent in ways the crew had never experienced. Lieutenant Reo worked tirelessly, recalibrating the ship's systems to cope with the fluctuations. His brow was furrowed in concentration, sweat beading on his forehead as the darkness outside swallowed them whole. "Captain, I've got a faint signal. It's directional." "Could be the hive's outermost edge," Reo said, pointing to a glowing dot on the scanner. Vance nodded. "Plot a course. This could be it." The journey grew more perilous as they drew closer. The Stellar Horizon entered a dense cluster of asteroids, floating in erratic orbits, each one seemingly alive with an unnatural energy. The swarm's presence here was palpable. A dark, buzzing sensation filled the air. It was as if the very fabric of space was alive, pulsing with a malevolent consciousness. "We're being scanned," Harper said, her voice low with unease. "It's like they're testing us." "Brace for impact," Vance barked as the ship shuddered. A massive shadow passed across the viewports, and a swarm of alien ships, bigger, faster, and more terrifying than anything the crew had faced, emerged from the dark expanse. Vance quickly assessed the situation. Shields up. Engage evasive maneuvers. Hold steady. The battle raged in the void, with the stellar horizon darting between asteroids and firing back at the swarm's relentless assault. The alien ships were relentless, their energy weapons striking the ship's shields in deadly arcs. But for every strike, the human crew retaliated with equal fury. The Krenon and Thaler warships, accompanying them in this mission, moved in tandem, their own firepower adding to the fray. "Captain, I'd lost the signal." Ray was shouted as his console blinked red. "Something's interfering with our systems. We're—" Before he could finish, an explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered and alarms blared. The hull groaned as more tendrils of dark energy wrapped around the ship. A shadow blotted out the stars, growing ever larger in the viewport. "It's the hive," Vance murmured, her voice tight. The massive structure was before them now, a living, breathing entity of pulsating flesh and metallic tendrils. It dwarfed even the largest capital ships, its shape ever changing, as if it was more than a structure, more than a thing. It was a mind. "Captain, we can't hold them off much longer," Hay said, her voice steady but strained. Vance turned to her crew, her mind racing. "We press on. Get us as close to the heart of that thing as you can. We need that relic." The stellar horizon barreled toward the hive's core, its systems failing under the immense pressure, its crew pushing every last ounce of energy to make it through the coming storm. The closer they got, the more the very air around them seemed to pulse with an overwhelming presence. They were no longer just fighting the swarm, they were entering its mind. The stellar horizon shot through the final defenses, breaking into the heart of the hive as the crew held their breath. It was now or never. The moment the stellar horizon breached the outer shell of the hive, all chaos broke loose. The ship shuddered violently, as if the very structure of the swarm was fighting back against their presence. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel, and the walls trembled as something deeper within the hive responded to their intrusion. Captain Elara Vance gripped the armrests of her chair as the view outside the viewport revealed a grotesque landscape of living machinery and writhing biomechanical tendrils. The core of the hive pulsed with an unnatural rhythmic beat, an eerie imitation of a heartbeat, resounding through the ship's hull like a death knell. "We're inside," Vance said, her voice grim, yet filled with determination. "Hold tight, everyone. We don't have much time." The ship was immediately surrounded by the pulsating growths of the hive, strange forms of alien tissue that appeared to be both alive and inorganic, like veins of corrupted metal and flesh intertwined. Tendrils lashed out, attempting to ensnare the stellar horizon, but the crew, working in perfect unison, managed to avoid most of them, their path guided by the dim flickering of the last remaining external sensors. Lieutenant Rayo worked quickly at his console. "Captain, I've got a fix on the relic's location. It's deep within the hive's central chamber, but the structure here, it's not like anything we've ever encountered. There's no solid ground. Everything seems to be shifting, alive." Vance's gaze hardened. "We'll adapt. We're getting that relic." As they descended deeper into the heart of the hive, the ship's corridors became increasingly disorienting. The walls seemed to pulse and breathe, and the air was thick with a damp, metallic smell. Every surface felt soft underfoot, as though the very materials were alive, changing as they walked. "We're not just inside a ship," Hayes muttered, her voice tight. "This place, it's part of them. It's like they've built their minds into the very architecture." Rowe nodded. "It's not just biomechanics anymore. The hive is one giant neural network. Everything here is a part of their consciousness." Vance turned toward him. "So, we're not just fighting machines. We're fighting an intelligence." "Yes," Rowe replied. and it's already aware of us. It's been aware from the moment we entered the system. The deeper they went, the more alien the surroundings became. Tendrils snaked through the walls, some nearly the size of the stellar horizon, their surface covered in glistening black scales. Every once in a while, the crew would pass what looked like a vast open chamber, a grotesque, fleshy expanse filled with towering, pulsating forms of matter, some of which seemed to be organic memory banks, others like breeding chambers, where countless new swarm warriors were being incubated. Vance's mind raced, her pulse quickening with the realization that this place was not only a warship, it was a factory, a breeding ground, and they were about to walk into the very heart of it. There, Reo said, pointing to a massive chamber up ahead. The walls were cracked and sloughed off, revealing a core of impossibly black matter. In the center of the room stood a large pedestal, and on it, the relic, gleaming faintly with an otherworldly glow. It seemed to be a piece of a much larger structure, as if it had been ripped out of the very fabric of the hive itself. "It's beautiful," Hayes whispered, "but it doesn't look like something we can just take." "Don't worry," Vance said. "We won't be taking it for long. We just need to get it back to the ship." But as they moved closer, the very air seemed to thicken. The hive was aware of them now, fully conscious, and it didn't intend to let them leave. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber began to close in, and the ground beneath them began to shift. The relic itself began to glow brighter, almost as though it were calling to them, or warning them. A deep, resonant voice echoed through their minds. "You are too late. You will never leave." It was not a sound they heard, but a thought they felt in their very bones, an invasion of their minds. A creeping presence that stretched its tendrils through their consciousness, searching for weakness. Vance fought back the instinct to recoil, forcing herself to remain focused. "We're not leaving without that relic. If we don't get it, it's the end for all of us." "Captain," Reo shouted, "it's trying to influence us, like it did with Soar. Fight it." But Vance's mind had already begun to swim with the voices of the hive. Their thoughts, cold and invasive, filled her head, whispering promises of unity, of becoming one with them. The temptation was overwhelming, but she gritted her teeth, her will like iron. "We fight," she growled, her voice unwavering. "We fight until the end." The crew stood firm, their minds locked together in defiance of the hive's influence, even as the very walls seemed to collapse in on them. They were in the heart of the enemy's mind, and the final battle was about to begin. The walls of the hive quaked as the crew of the Stellar Horizon stood their ground, their minds battling the overwhelming presence of the hive. It was as though they were standing inside the consciousness of an ancient, malevolent god, its thoughts vast, cold, and oppressive. Every tendril that slithered along the floor, every pulse of light from the walls, seemed to pull at their very souls, trying to drag them into the hive's insidious unity. But Vance, Rao, Hayes, and the rest of the crew fought back with everything they had. "We're not joining you," Vance muttered under her breath, focusing on the relic in the center of the room. It was the key, she knew it. The artifact would sever the connection between the hive and the void, stopping the swarm from continuing their cycle of consumption. Reo was the first to act. With a grim determination, he pulled out a device from his pack, a field disruptor designed to block neural connections. It was a gamble, but it was their only hope. He activated it, sending a wave of energy through the chamber, temporarily cutting off the hive's direct influence on their minds. The oppressive force that had nearly suffocated them lifted for a moment. "Now," Vance shouted, sprinting toward the pedestal. Hayes, her rifle raised, covered Vance as she made her way to the relic. But the hive wasn't done yet. A massive tendril shot out from the wall, faster than they could react, coiling around Rao's legs. He let out a strangled yell as the creature's strength lifted him off the ground. His fingers desperately reached for his weapon, but the tendril tightened, squeezing the breath from him. Rao. Vance cried out, but she couldn't afford to stop. The relic was just within reach, its glow pulsing with a strange magnetic pull. She felt its power, felt its connection to the hive, and yet it was something else entirely, something ancient and untouchable. With a final desperate surge of energy, Vance leaped to the pedestal and grabbed the relic. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, an explosion of energy erupted from the object. A wave of pure, blinding light surged through the chamber, washing over everything. For a moment, everything stopped. When the light faded, the ship's systems were dead silent. The influence of the hive was gone. The oppressive presence vanished, and the walls of the hive collapsed inward, its once thriving neural network now severed. Tendrils fell limp, and the pulsing heart of the hive turned still. Vance, Hayes shouted, her voice cutting through the silence. Vance stood by the pedestal, her hand still gripping the relic, her body shaken but unbroken. The force of the release had been overwhelming, but it had worked. The hive was no more. The relic had severed its connection to the void, cutting off its endless cycle of rebirth. Rao, barely conscious, still hung in the grip of the tendril. With a quick burst of fire, Hayes severed it, and Rao collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. "We did it," Rao wheezed, looking up at Vance. "We stopped them." Vance nodded, but the weight of the moment was not lost on her. They had won this battle, but at what cost? The stellar horizon had been battered in the fight, and many of her crew were injured. The swarm, though decimated, was far from the only threat in the galaxy, but for now they had stopped the void from consuming everything. "Let's get out of here," Vance said, her voice steady, though her heart beat with the knowledge that they had only bought a little more time. "Rao, are you good to fly?" "I can do it," Rao answered, though his voice was weak. "But we're not out of this yet. We've got to hurry." With the relic secured, they made their way back to the stellar horizon. The ship's systems were compromised, but they could still escape the collapsing core of the hive. The ship's engines roared to life, and as the crew worked together to guide it back toward the relative safety of open space, the fractured remnants of the hive crumbled behind them. The journey back was slow and arduous, the stellar horizon limping through the dark expanse. But they were alive, and that was something they hadn't dared hope for until now. The relic, now safely stored aboard their ship, was a reminder that there was still hope, no matter how dark the galaxy had become. As they exited the field of dark matter and into the familiar stars of their home galaxy, Vance turned to her crew, the burden of their survival still heavy on her shoulders. "We've made it," she said. "But this fight isn't over, not by a long shot." And as the stars sparkled in the distance, a faint whisper echoed in her mind. This was only the beginning.